All right, welcome back to Changing Minds and Changing Lives. I am, as always, your humble host, Julie Sowash, co founder and strategic advisor for the Disability Solutions team. We have a really exciting show here today, a guest that I've been waiting to talk to. And so excited that Ashley was able to get booked for us. Before we bring her in, I want to just kind of go over three stories that crossed my desk this week that I think set us up nicely for the conversation that we're gonna have with Megan today. So the first is that kind of when you look at these stories, they all seem like they belong on different places in the shelf. One's a federal agency, one's a private sector lawsuit, one is one of the big giant Wall Street banks getting credit for what I would call the bare minimum. Put them side by side, and they're telling us something about where disability employment actually stands in 2026. So let's start with the CDC. Last year, the Department of Homeland Security, or HHS, rolled out an accommodation policy that lined up neatly with this administration's return to office mandate, which I think a lot of us heard about a lot in early 2025. And it made it harder for disabled federal employees to use telework or remote work as a reasonable accommodation. So, what was the result? A backlog of 9,000 accommodation requests, hundreds of EEO complaints at the CDC alone, which is a part of HHS, alleging disability discrimination. And there's an estimate that cleaning up the mess just at the CDC could cost over $200 million at minimum. Last week, the CDC quietly walked that policy back. And what we know is the policy didn't fail because of bad luck. It failed because it was designed to push people out. And the legal exposure caught up with HHS, and CDC, and the administration faster than the political wins did. So then move on to story number two. On April 23rd, FedEx Express settled with the EEOC for $280,000, so a fairly minimal charge for them. But they were charged with demanding its dispatchers come back to a downtown Manhattan office. And those same dispatchers had been working in those jobs remotely for 3 years. And then saying, this is no longer a reasonable accommodation. You have to come back into the office. And at least one of those individuals was effectively forced into retirement. So, similar script as HHS, different uniform, playbook turned out the same. And then last but not least, we have Goldman Sachs. And you guys know that I am the last person who's going to hand a participation trophy out, especially to a giant bank. But Goldman did something this week that almost nobody actually does. They published, in what I feel like is plain language, exactly how a candidate with a disability requests an accommodation in their hiring process. And they tied those accommodations to understanding how it relates to compensation, promotion, and benefits, not just getting hired. So we really had them tie it through the entire process. And that's fairly stunning. If you've heard me talk ever, you know that one of the biggest fails I see in corporate America is having an accommodation process that actually works, is thoughtful, and works the way that it says it works. And this is a massive employer who's now admitting, that the application process itself is where most disabled candidates disappear, where we go into the black hole. And so, like, how does this tie all together? So, I know I've mentioned it to you guys in the last episode, but the Disability Solutions Disability at Work report came out earlier this week or earlier this month. And the data from the other side tells a similar story. Only 10% of disabled professionals believe employers are genuinely committed to hiring people with disabilities. Almost 75% do not believe employers genuinely understand disability related needs at work. And let's be honest, in the current political climate, only 13% they say they feel fully safe disclosing a disability to their employer. So you have a workforce that doesn't trust the people writing the policies. and you have policies that keep proving them right. The gap between what an organization says and what employees actually experience is the story. And I think that is what we're going to talk about today. My guest is Megan Fuciarelli. She is the founder and chief empowerment officer of Us Squared Consulting, where she works with leaders on ethical leadership, authenticity, and the everyday behaviors that decide whether trust gets built or broken. Her core idea is one that I have really enjoyed thinking about this week. Authenticity is not a personality trait, it is a leadership practice. Megan, welcome to Changing Minds, Changing Lives.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie. I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So, before we get started, tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about Us Squared and how you got into this line of work.
Oh my goodness, that could take the whole time, but I'll try to make it short, Julie. So, really, I have coined the term authenticity amplifier. And what I mean by that is it's not about helping people be authentic because we can't teach people how to be themselves. What we do is we help businesses be able to receive the authenticity they say they want, right?
Okay.
And how I got into this work is I'm actually a retired school superintendent. And as a school superintendent, going through the education system myself, I realized that there were pockets of children, pockets of families who were consistently being left out of the conversation. And when I had the opportunity to retire and start the next chapter of my life, as so many educators do, I said, what actually is my passion? What will bring me true happiness? And in my mind, a different level of success? Because on paper and according to society, I was successful, but I wanted to feel that internally. And I decided to start Us Squared. Initially, it started as my own thing. I was going to be an independent contractor kind of working for myself. I had no intention of having a company, of having employees. 1 year later, I had 7 employees, and at the height of our company, we had 43 employees globally, serving clients globally, and it's just been an amazing ride, and what was so interesting about speaking with you today and really looking through this is I also have a disability, and I remember some of my own kind of interactions with that, and disclosing that disability was more difficult than actually working through whatever things I needed to in order to be able to succeed with my disability. It was always that trust factor of disclosure. But I decided to do this work because it was my passion, and that's what really got me here.
Now, that's amazing. I mean, congratulations. I know you're about to celebrate 10 years
Yes.
in business, which is no short feat in and of itself, but going through what we've been through for now
Mhm.
the last decade and a half and to run this type of business successfully is something to really pat yourself on the back for. But I also really appreciate what you said about this is where your passion is. I think that is so much about, what I did at Disability Solutions. What I do now with Catch 22 is making things right gives me energy.
Mhm.
It gives me purpose. And I am never more satisfied than when I'm doing this work. So thank you and congratulations. Um, you've built your career around the idea that authenticity is a leadership practice.
Mhm.
We just went through some of those stats about how employees are not feeling
Mhm.
that employers understand them or that they're actually committed to the things that they've been saying they're committed to.
Right.
So, from your seat, tell me, what does authentic leadership look like in practice? And what are some examples you can give of where employers are maybe getting it wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. So, authentic leadership, what we really phrase that in is the idea of having courage, having acceptance, having respect, and having empathy. So, those 4 traits together make authentic leadership. And when we talk about courage, it's about being willing to have those tough conversations. It's about being willing to lean into something when you're uncomfortable and being willing to hear the other perspective. And sometimes conversations, especially for those of people who have privilege or power, maybe neurotypical or people without disabilities struggle to talk about the other side because we've been accustomed as a society to not talk about it. But
Mhm.
really, by ignoring it, we're minimizing and invalidating the conversations that need to happen. So, that first aspect of authentic leadership is being willing to lean in to those difficult conversations. And as I was looking through the report, I was looking at, okay, how does this really play out in the data that you were able to collect in the report that you mentioned? And one thing I heard about is when people say, I'm just not going to talk about it. When employers say, I'm going to retreat from DEI language, I'm just not going to talk about it. Employees don't see that as a neutral. They see that as they're running away from that protection, right? I'm no longer going to be protected. If we're not talking about it, I'm not going to be protected anymore. There's that loss of trust.
Yes.
And then when we move into the second aspect of authentic leadership, it's about acceptance and it's about acknowledging that we all have different abilities. I don't like to use the term disability, it's different abilities, because I truly believe that everyone has different abilities, regardless of whether you have a quote unquote disability or not, right?
Mhm.
And I think as leaders, to be authentic, we have to be able to look within and say, am I being authentic and do I acknowledge my own abilities? And then respect is critical as well.
Oh, yes, and you mentioned in one answer so many of the topics that I wanna cover with you, so I'm trying to decide where do we go next. I
Oh
think one
goodness, I have a really bad habit of doing that. I'm so
Oh, no,
sorry.
you set the stage perfectly. No, you set the stage perfectly. I'm like, "Where can I move these questions around?" But something that you just mentioned caught my eye or caught my ear, and it's not a way that I've said it before, and you will hear me say it now, and I'll credit you, but you're talking about, organizations stepping back from DEI, some quietly, some pretty loudly, um, because the political climate has changed.
Absolutely.
And I will always say this political climate, just like the weather, will not last forever. So those of us who now have been deceived, harmed, you know, um, had our trust broken, won't forget that.
Mm,
And I think what you said was so nicely of stepping back quietly is not the same as just stepping back. It is in an underrepresented community's perspective causing harm or losing protection. It's creating fear.
mhm.
Um, and so, when what can leaders do now, or how do we think about this from a leadership perspective? There's nothing an average CHRO can do or a chief town officer can do if a CEO has decided to move away from DEI.
Mhm.
How can we move that into leadership as daily practice?
Yep.
Especially when all those and external pressures and just
Mhm.
everyday life pressures are pushing us as leaders in the other direction.
Yeah, I think the number one piece to acknowledge is that authenticity and authentic leadership becomes so much harder when it feels politically conditional. Right? If you're in an organization and over the last 10 years, just in the time I've had my company, we've seen the pendulum go from one swing to the other. And
Mhm.
extremism and that political kind of power that ties behaviors to businesses causes an even higher level of distrust
Mhm.
within an organization. So as leaders and what we work with leaders to do is say, what are your core values? Don't worry about the language, don't worry about how you say it. What are your core values? What do you believe? That's why we use the phrase of everyone deserves to be seen, heard, welcomed, and valued. We don't necessarily use the acronym of JEDI anymore. What we do instead is say, you deserve to be seen. That's diversity. You
Mhm.
deserve to be heard. That's inclusion. You deserve to be welcomed. That's equity. And you deserve to be included and valued. That's justice. But when we can use words that are not triggering as an organization and stay true to our values, then we can build that trust with our employees, and our employees know, and our clients and everyone we serve, they know what we stand for and they're more willing to trust us because not everyone is going to agree with everything we think.
Right.
So I never encourage businesses try to be everything for everyone because then we've all heard it before, you will be nothing to anyone, right?
Yeah.
So you have to stand true in who you are, whatever those beliefs are. Don't allow those beliefs to be changed because of outside, especially political influence.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's so beautifully said when, when we first moved into this second administration and the rollback of, um, you know, affirmative action from an executive order perspective. We gutted the OFCCP and we really moved away in a lot of ways to protections from the EEOC. We had conversations with a lot of employers who were like, what do we do now? What do we do now? We can't talk about it anymore. And at Disability Solutions, our motto has always been, nose to the ground, doing the work.
Mhm.
And this is the time where it's not sexy and you don't get all the kudos and the nice free PR and the happy feelings, but everyday leadership really is showing that we live these values, whether it's politically advantageous or it's a good PR practice. And I think that's where a lot of trust has been broken because in a, kind of a post George Floyd world where it became sexy to be inclusive, um, a lot of companies, and we've seen them and we can name them all, I won't do that now because I do it regularly, walked away and you knew that they weren't really committed. But we know that there are a lot of leaders in those organizations and everyday frontline managers who are actually committed to that work. And I think that's just a beautiful way to say it. The next thing that you mentioned, which is another one of my kind of favorite topics, is how hard it is to talk and have difficult conversations without shutting people down.
Mhm.
And I think there's kind of two ways that we could look at this. And if you'll bear with me, let's go down both paths together. Um, the first one is as someone who does believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, as a core value to myself. I It took me a long time to recognize that the way that I was engaging people who didn't have those same commitments to myself was, I don't want to say out of touch, but it was not going to move the needle
Mhm.
at all. And so I would love for you to kind of talk to us kind of in this first section. How do leaders, how do you as a
Mm.
human, kind of create space for those conversations without just shutting people down and allowing them to feel and express ideas that we may not agree with, but we as adults should be able to have together and work through regardless of kind of how those conversations end.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. So, we have 7 core principles, and they're really our guiding post within Us Squared. And the very first one is that guilt and politeness are the glue that hold prejudice and stigma in place. Right?
That's it.
And what
Yep.
we mean by that is that if you feel guilt or shame or you try to blame people, you're just perpetuating the problem that exists in our country and in our world. If you are so polite that you're unwilling to have those difficult conversations, we used to refer to it as political correctness, right?
Yeah.
Or being politically correct. That's been out the window for a couple of years now, but the idea still remains. People say, I don't want to talk about anything that might make someone upset. Well,
Mhm.
here's the truth everything is going to make someone upset. So if we come at the conversation with curiosity rather than trying to prove our point right or try to prove the other person wrong, if we genuinely come in with, I want to understand each other, then that's the first step. The next thing I tell people all the time is I believe that everyone, regardless of their background, believes in a component of Jedi. Everyone does. They might not say that it's a component of Jedi. They might not understand what it is, but it's about level setting what is the definition of our work. Because what's happened is, especially in our society right now, people have an interpretation of what it means because of mass media.
Yep.
They don't actually hear what is the bottom underlying cause of why this was created in the first place. We started doing this work We've been doing it for years. Really, the rise of the popularity of it was after Rodney King and after the beating of Rodney King. And before that, there were people doing this work.
Mhm.
But it became popularized, and it became even more mainstream after the murder of George Floyd, right? It takes an extreme event to cause conversation, and honestly, that conversation needs to happen. So what I will do if I know I'm going into a conversation with someone who might not be on the same page as me, I know that we all have access to the same book.
Mhm.
I just need to help them get to my page, or I need to go to whatever page they're on to see what they're coming from. So what I will do is we actually have 15 different identities. I won't go into all of them, but those 15 identities allow me to figure out which identity I can dive deeper into to help them see what I see. So for
Okay.
example, if I'm talking to a cis white hetero man, right? So
Mhm.
straight, able-bodied, heterosexual man, I might come to him and say, and maybe he's married to a woman. I might say, "Oh, wow, yeah, your wife, you have such a beautiful, loving relationship. Can you believe that in our lifetime, your wife would not have been able to have a credit card? Can you believe that if your wife wanted to buy a house, even just 50 years ago, she wouldn't have been able to without a male cosigner?"
Yep.
Wow. So I'll bring it into an identity that I know is a little bit less controversial to make the conversation comfortable and say, that's some of the work I do is to make sure that those problems and those situations and those barriers that people had this many years ago within our lifetime don't continue to perpetuate problems for our future. Or if they have a daughter, right? Or
Mhm.
if I will bring it into something that relates to them that
Okay.
feels more safe so that we can dive into the difficult conversations because our fifth core principle is that growth occurs in discomfort.
Mhm.
And we know that if you're uncomfortable about something, not unsafe, because
Right.
there is a difference, but if you're uncomfortable about something, it's probably because you're on the brink of something amazing. So we
Yeah.
really just encourage that.
Oh, that's great. I mean, and it is such a it is a more comfortable approach than just being told you're wrong.
Absolutely.
And I can look back through a couple of years of where I could have done much more, but much more with a little bit more calmness. And I think a lot of us are coming out on the other side of that now, trying to figure out how do we not soften our values or our expectations, but
Mhm,
that we do a better job of meeting people where they are.
mhm,
Um, and I think that kinda takes me to something kinda the other side of that difficult conversations question is, something that I've known for years, is that a lot of times talking about disability at work is very difficult.
mhm,
And it is difficult because of 3 things. Um, One is if we're taught not to talk about uncomfortable things, to avoid things that cause us discomfort. So if we don't know how to engage a person who is blind, who is deaf, who has a mental illness, we are more likely to avoid them
mhm,
than to engage them. The second is that we have been taught that people with disabilities are charity, they're charitable, that our approach to them should be philanthropic, meaning that they are other than us, they are lesser.
that we
And
should have
as
sympathy rather than empathy.
Yep, and as a person who lives with disabilities, right, even we have different types of those same biases within our own community.
Mhm,
Um, and then the third is that we've always leaders. Once you get into a management position, you go into all of those trainings, all those classes that tell you, you can't discriminate, you can't do this, you can't do that. And all of a sudden, as a leader, you're terrified of mucking it up. So
mhm.
you're either scared of getting yourself in trouble, getting your company in trouble, hurting someone who you don't intend to hurt, and just in general being completely unaware of how to have conversations. And that's one thing that we've just seen, and I've seen hundreds of times and had
Mhm.
hundreds of conversations of people who just don't know how to have difficult conversations about disability. And, from a leadership perspective, and I would even say from maybe a new leader perspective or a lower level leader perspective, how do you help those leaders become more comfortable
Mhm,
in a conversation that they have been taught
mhm.
by everything in their corporate environment to be uncomfortable with?
Yeah. So the first step is, and it's really where the name of my company originates. So us squared is understand self, unite society. So it's about understanding who you are and what you bring to the table before you try to understand anyone else and before we ultimately unite society. So the number one piece for any leader, specifically newer leaders who have that fear, because I think many people in society, whether they're leaders or not, have that fear of saying the wrong thing, right? We don't want
Mhm.
to offend. I believe that most people have best intentions based on their lived experiences, right?
Yep.
We don't know what could hurt someone if we don't have the conversation about it, right? So that's important to just note. And I think the first piece with that is to understand what biases you may have, right? To be able to do that self reflection to say, okay, this is what I think. When I hear about ADHD, this is what I think. When I
Mhm.
hear about neurodiversity, this is what I think. What are your first thoughts? Taking away the shame and the guilt around whatever you think, because we have been socialized to have those beliefs. Our first thoughts in our brains are embedded by the age of 12. And as far as I know, most leaders, especially in corporate America, are over the age of 12, which means those are already there. They're
Mhm.
cemented, right?
Yep.
So, as adults, what we can do is take a deep dive into that psyche to say, what do I believe to be true? And how can I learn more information to either confirm or deny what I believe to be true? And it starts with those conversations. But the number one thing within all of that is when you go into a conversation, don't go in to prove yourself right or to prove the other person wrong. Go in with curiosity. So I give a sentence frame of, you're brand new. Maybe they hired someone new. I have this with everyone, not just someone who might have already disclosed they have a disability, but having the conversation with everyone of how can I help you be the most successful? Because I truly believe that accommodations are not meant just for those who have a documented disability.
Mm.
Accommodations are meant for everyone to be successful, regardless of what they need in order to do that, as long as it is something that is able to be provided within reason.
Yep. Yep. And I often say we provide accommodations every day for people because we understand or share their lived experience. For example, I was a single mom for a period of time. I had single moms on my team. I knew what they needed. If
Mhm.
they said, "Hey, I need to start 15 minutes late," or "Hey, I need to take an afternoon for XYZ," whenever that was possible, that was an easy yes for me because I had that shared
Absolutely.
experience. And as we have more people with disabilities move into leadership roles, it becomes easier for them to provide those same types of accommodations. Um, but it's merely because we've been uncomfortable in not knowing how to ask those questions or how to say without creating risk that, I want to help. And I think a lot of times, I have to go back to our community and say, I've met thousands of leaders in this work, and I would say 90 plus percent all want to do it well. And they
Mhm.
all want to do it right. They show up because they want to do it.
Yep.
They're gonna fail. And we've got to let them fail and start again and hold them accountable when, accountability is appropriate. Um, and as we kind of wrap up, it's been just a great conversation. It's allowed me to think about things with different wording that I haven't before, and I really, really appreciate that. Part of kind of the last part of the disability at work survey this year that really surprised me was even with everything going on, all of the fear, the skepticism, the broken trust,
Mhm.
57% of our respondents believe that federal contractors, so that's 400,000 plus establishments in the US alone, should continue to track their disability data. Because
Mhm.
why? We know now that that tracking creates accountability. Without data, we don't know. And people are genuinely asking that employers are not walking not to walk away. They're
Mhm.
asking for them to continue to provide themselves and our government and our community, that the receipts that they're doing the work. And so, last question: what gives you hope right now, and what needs to change for organizations to start to rebuild trust with the people who work for them?
So, I love this question because it's about what gives me hope and what I look forward to. And I have a young son, and when we talked at the very beginning of why do we do this work, and I had my son late in life, and I'm a single mother. My son will be 16 this summer, and he is proud of the work I do. He is a black man in America. He's a multiracial child, but no one sees that when they see him. They see a black man in America. And there's a lot of fear around that, and there's a lot of concern around that. Um, and I am hopeful that he will continue to learn how to have conversations and that the organizations that hire him in the future will continue to do this work. And as I was reading through the report and looking through how there is a desire, hey, keep tracking me. I want this accountability. Accountability is critical. I
Mhm.
also saw, I mean, as high as I think it was, let me look at my notes right here, 71%, right? Almost three quarters of the people who responded said that they are afraid of discrimination. And at the same time, they simply want to be seen, right?
Yep.
So they're asking for their data to be tracked because they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be included in the conversation. And I'm hopeful that we'll continue to do that. And what I really appreciate, even though the last few years, especially the last 18 months, have been extremely difficult here in the US and globally, what I am excited about is that there are companies who are staying true with this work. They might change their language, right?
Mhm.
And the companies who have stepped away are the companies who were never committed in the first place. And I am someone who I would rather know where you stand than have you put on a fake face. So if
Yes.
you want to back away from this, that's okay. I know that you're not a company that I want to support.
Yep.
I'm okay with that. I have quite a few companies that I will not support. I don't tell anyone else not to support them. That is up to them. I personally don't support them because they've made their values very clear. And I have other companies who I will pay 50 to 60% more because they are standing true on what their values are. We are a values driven economy more than anything else we have ever been. People are making decisions based on what their values are and how much they align with who they are as people. And I think as a society, we have to talk about where we have gone wrong so that we can make sure we don't repeat those mistakes. And right now, the conversations that we're having, as difficult as they are, we need to continue having them because I do truly believe that we will get through this. And I hope that the pendulum does not swing all the way to the other side because that's what we've seen in our recent history is the pendulum going far right to far left to far right. We need to be more in the center. We need to move away from the extremism on either side.
Yeah, well, amen to that. So, Megan, if our listeners want to engage with you, have these conversations, have you in their organization, how do they get a hold of you? What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, so we are on most of the social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. They can also go to our website. It's just US, the number two, consulting.com. And our handle on all of social media is US2 Consulting. So we would love to
Awesome.
be in touch with anyone who'd like to reach out.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time today. This is a fantastic conversation. And I know it's one that our listeners will very much enjoy and get a lot out of. You guys, another episode in the tank. Are there guests that you want me to bring on? Who are they? Send them our way. Get a hold of Ashley, get a hold of myself, submit a contact form at Disability Solutions. We're always looking for new guests, new voices in our community because there's so much power here to be heard that's impossible for me to know it all by myself. So, have an amazing May, and thanks for joining the podcast.